And we're 100 attendees.
Yeah, climbing fast.
Yeah.
And
So,
the live stream is live as well.
okay. I'll just say good morning, everyone. We're a few minutes early yet, so we'll get started around the top of the hour, but people, yeah, we're letting people get a chance to join in. Let's see. Oh, good morning, Lamia. And Ahmed had a question. Did I see? Now, Michael, I'm not as skilled with Zoom, but we had one person raise their hand. Did they have a question or a thought?
Nope, looks like they're just saying hello in the chat.
Oh, just saying, oh, okay. Oh, I see John Wilson, my friend from South Africa. Oh, and we have Trevor Thompson. Awesome. Hey, Trevor, it's great to see you.
There's Scott. No, Scott, I'm never shaving again. This is how I'm going to stay now.
Which Scott?
Scott Arentz. He's my uncle.
Oh, okay, nice. Oh, from Keysight.
From Keysight, yeah. When we got
Scott Arentz. There we go. Yeah, I see him. There he is.
Got married last year, and I got a bunch of Keysight swag for the wedding. So.
Okay, Ahmed's question about how can we improve the calibration process? Wow, that is a enormous question. Where to even start on that one?
Yeah.
That one we're maybe you had to talk about a little bit later, but the best way to improve it is to really thoroughly understand your measurement uncertainty contributors from each one and go after the largest one from there. And Francisco from Brazil is there, great. But yeah, Trevor Thompson's one of the original committee members that helped us to write this document. So this is it's wonderful to have him on too. And we have Marco from Brazil. Oh, Steve Sidney. All right. Oh, now, Steve Sidney, you said you promised not to ask rude questions. Well, that just wouldn't be like you now, would it? Steve's all right. He's a great friend.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here.
Okay.
So welcome and thanks for coming. We'll still have people coming in. If you have any issues connecting or you have colleagues that are having trouble getting in, we do have a live stream set up as well that should kick in once we reach the capacity of this meeting. And then additionally, we're going to be recording this webinar so that afterwards it'll be available on the Fluke Calibration website. So if they do continue to have any issues, it will be available in the recorded format. So thank you again for coming for this webinar. And we're happy to have Jeff talking to us today about the changes with ILAC P14. So Jeff is the Chief Corporate Metrologist for Fluke. Since joining in 2010, he has driven improvements in measurement quality for engineering, manufacturing, and service activities for Fluke and Fortive organizations around the world. He has been a key contributor to development of international standards and practices for calibration laboratories. In 2011, Jeff was recognized by Measurement Science Conference for outstanding contributions and leadership in metrology. And in 2017, he was named a Fluke Fellow, which is the highest technical award for the company. Prior to joining Fluke, Jeff has co-authored publications with NIST and served as a consultant to NIST and UNIDO. Jeff has a bachelor's degree from Purdue University in physics. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeff.
Once again, thank you very much, Michael. I really appreciate your help and to help host this session for us today. So
Absolutely.
So with that, I will go ahead and get started and share my screen. And let's see who can share. Only hosts. Let's see. Am I sharing my share? Okay, there we go. Share. I'm going to use screen to share. And Michael, can you see my the system? Okay, so sounds good. Let's see. I was going to turn off my camera during the discussion. Well, it's just, let's see. How do I get to the camera function now? On that. Oh, there we go. Well, I'll just leave it. I'll leave it on. That's fine. Okay. So again, welcome to my presentation today. It's on ILAC P14. The version of September 2020. And again, the title of this is What's New, What's Changed, and Why. And again, like I said, we'll get ready to go and get started. And come on, let's get to the next screen. So the first thing, we have a lot of people on here that might be kind of new, either to the field of calibration or new to understanding accreditation and what accreditation really is. So the first thing is, okay, this document is called ILAC P14. So what is ILAC? What does it really, what does it mean and what does it stand for? So ILAC stands for the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation. And what this organization is it's the oversight organization for all accreditation bodies. And again, we've got some wonderful, very high level people from both accreditation bodies and and who've held positions within ILAC on this line today. So pretty exciting to see that. But you know, where you deal with your local accreditation body, such as NAVLAP is one of the accreditation bodies in the United States, the National Voluntary Laboratory Accreditation Program, or UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, or, for example, CNAS, the China National Accreditation Service. Each part of the world has their own accreditation bodies, but the question is who keeps the accreditation bodies on their toes and ensures their competency as well, and that's what ILAC does. And again, the benefit of that is, you know, one of the taglines of ILAC is measured once, accepted everywhere. We want to encourage a global economy where test and calibration results that are produced in one economy can be accepted in all economies around the world. And that's really the ultimate end goal for ILAC. And as a part of that, they have a document called the Mutual Recognition Arrangement, where once accreditation bodies have been found to be competent, then they could enter into the mutual recognition arrangement where they do mutually recognize the calibration and test results from that process. And again, it's incredibly impactful to the economy, the activities that ILAC does, because they can promote and encourage free trade. So back in the 1990s, for example, Fluke used to have to get accredited from both the German accreditation body and the US accreditation body because there was no mutual recognition arrangement in place, and they didn't accept the results from America and Germany and vice versa. So that Fluke's only alternative was to get accredited by both, and now that no longer needs to take place. So a bit of an introduction. I'm going to move this down out of the way. So, you know, why this document actually came into being. So, you know, all the accreditation bodies around the world are doing assessments of laboratories to ISO 17025. And at the General Assembly back in October of 2017, the Accreditation Issues Committee of ILAC formed a task force to investigate the needs for the revision of our previous version, ILAC P14 2013, taking into account the changes that had occurred in ISO 17025 back in 2017. But we also had to kind of deal with ISO 17025 2005 version until the end of 2020. There was a time where, even though 17025 2017 is being published and people are moving their accreditations to that, we still had some people that were working under the 2005 version of the standard. So we needed to kind of think about both of those sides out of this process too. And this task force was to report its findings at the midterm meeting in 2018. And what the task force had determined is, yes, there's enough substantial changes in ISO 17025 2017 version that we really did need to do some improvements to the document. So the task force members were comprised of Barbara Belzer from NavLap, and she was the leader of the task force. And then we had Trevor Thompson, who is the UCAS. He's now the retired UCAS calibration program manager, and myself representing the ILAC laboratory committee. So, and just to share a little background out of that unfortunately over the next 18 months of this process, Trevor elected to take retirement. So he kind of started moving away, and then Barbara elected to take retirement as well. So at the end of the day, I was kind of the last person standing out of this process. So I hope that Trevor and Barbara like the end result as well. So what I've tried to do in this presentation is lay out, is to kind of explain it for both the person who is new to ILAC P14 and people who have been used to the older version to understand the changes. So I'm going to present some of the key points in black in the presentation, and then in red, any major changes, and we'll go on to talk about what that means. I see a few people that have raised the hand. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to stop at 45 minutes past the hour and have at least 15 minutes of time for questions and answers. So if you can hold your questions until we get to that point, I'd like to get through this. Also, I originally had thought about maybe going a little bit longer in this, but I think we are constrained to an hour. So I do have some great bonus material at the end of this about rounding rules for numbers that kind of interrelate into this process as well, that I think will be beneficial. But it's a pretty easy read, and everybody's going to have access to the slide deck when we're done here. So it's something that you could have in hand, a nice reference that you could read over on yourself when we get to that part as well, if we don't make it to that today. So the next part, so this is ILAC P14. So what does P stand for? What are P series documents? So occasionally it's determined, well, ISO 17025 is not an accreditation standard. It is not a standard made to just accredit laboratories. What ISO 17025 is it's a document to help ensure the competency of laboratories that do calibration and testing. And because of that, sometimes there is a little bit of ambiguity in certain places of it, because again, it wasn't meant to be an accreditation standard. However, the accreditation bodies like to resolve those parts of ambiguity and clarify certain audit points as well. So because of that, they created the P series of documents. And they form part of the criteria for ILAC MRA evaluations. So accreditation bodies are required to utilize and comply with these P series documents, and also the laboratories that they accredit also have to comply with these P series documents as well. So and again, I just grabbed a few of these that are kind of important for the calibration and testing community. So ILAC P9, which is the ILAC policy for participation and proficiency testing activities, is one of them. P10 is the ILAC policy on metrological traceability of measurement results. I might try to do a future webinar on that as well. I was involved with helping to revise that, although it's a pretty straightforward document. And of course, then we have P14, which is the ILAC policy for measurement uncertainty and calibration. And again, if you just go to the ilac.org website, you could download all of these documents for free. And there are also some good G series, which are called guidance series documents, that are also very helpful to the laboratory for this process as well. So getting into the actual document itself, I'm going to take it section by section. So the P14 has a preamble and explains why and what we're doing. So, the goal of this document is to enhance harmonization in the expression of uncertainty and measurement on certificates and scopes of accreditation. We want a level playing field, and I think the laboratory should want a level playing field as well, where say that maybe less knowledgeable and on rare occasion unscrupulous behavior could exploit weaknesses in or ambiguities to their advantage. We don't want that. We really want to make sure that all the laboratories comply to an equal area. And that, again, that's a pitch for the ILAC Laboratory Committee. That's why that committee is there. And it's that the ILAC Laboratory Committee is made up of organizations of laboratories, such as the National Laboratory Association in South Africa, Eurolab in Europe, which is more of a testing community, and NCSL International is a community of in the United States, and each of these organizations send representatives to ILAC committee to help work on these documents. But anyway, so originally the issue on this was brought forth by a resolution all the way back in 1999. We started talking about this, and what they stated was that the arrangement signatories shall have and implement criteria for determining uncertainty of measurements in calibration by June of 2000. The signatory shall demonstrate that such documents are equivalent to the GUM guide. That's a bit redundant, but this is the exact text of the resolution. The document EALR2, which is the expression of uncertainty of measurements in calibration, will be used as the measuring stick for such document as a temporary measure pending the development of an ILAC document. So, you can see that they were looking for a little more guidance about uncertainty on certificates and scopes. So, and by the way, the present version of EA402 is available through Euromet, and that is a wonderful document on uncertainty that you can download for free and take a look at, as well as a good reference on an easier understanding of measurement uncertainty too. So one of the things that we added into this is down here in red, where we clarified the language of the document, saying that shall indicates a requirement, should indicates a recommendation, may indicates a permission, and can indicates a possibility or capability. And I'm going to pop to there. Yes. So I'm trying to remember how I organize this. So going on from that, so what's new or what's changed? So we had some acronyms in the previous version that were undefined. So we went ahead and explained and clearly defined what all the acronyms were used in the document. Note that what didn't change is that BMC we completely got rid of the term BMC because it's no longer necessary. We're all using CMC now. The previous document had to bridge the gap from best measuring capability, or BMC, to calibration measurement capability, or CMC. So now that we're all solidly in that, we don't talk about BMC anymore. And then we did addition to the definitions of the verbal forms, and why we wanted to do that was we wanted to align the language of P14 to the ISO Casco 17000 series documents. So if you look in ISO 17025 or any of the other 17,000 series documents, you will see the exact same language of defining what may and can and shall actually represent for this document. So the purpose, it says it sets out the requirements for the statements of CMCs and evaluation of measurement uncertainty in certificates and reports. So note that we deleted the term guidelines out of this, and I'll talk about that more in a second. And again, it goes further on to define what a calibration laboratory is in the context of this document, saying that anybody who performs calibration activities, whether you're a testing lab doing calibration, whether you're a reference materials producer that's doing the calibration portion and not the reference materials provision portion of that, this document would apply to them too. And of course, it's, as before, to develop a harmonized interpretation of the GUM and consistent use of CMCs. And again, it's, as we talked about reference materials before, we explicitly explained that it covers the calibration of reference materials, but not the assignment of uncertainty of the property value for the reference materials. And I have to admit that I'm not a reference materials expert, but that's what how they wanted to explain it. So that's the way we put it in there. And then the last thing of this document is there is an enforcement date, which is March of 2021. So good news is, hey, you don't have to actually be in full compliance with this document yet until at least for another couple of months out of the process. And again, this document was prepared by the ILAC Accreditation Issues Committee. Sorry, I missed a term in there. ILAC Accreditation Issues Committee, and endorsed by the ILAC membership. And again, there are some great people like Steve Sidney and John Wilson that are part of the laboratory committee that also put a lot of work and and feedback into this document as well. So, what's new or changed from this section? Well, again, as you saw, one of the things on the previous pages, we removed that term guidelines. And why did we do that? Well, this document's a P series. It's a policy series document. So we didn't feel that guidelines really necessarily had a place. If we needed a guidance document, we could create a G series document to give best practices and guidance. But this is about policy, as well. We further defined what calibration laboratories were in the scope of this document. And because the previous version of the document also addressed calibration activities for reference material producers and medical reference measurement laboratories. So it did explain that this could be used by lots of different laboratories that are doing calibration. And then we clarified the requirements for reference materials producers so that we could delineate between those activities and the reference material production activities as well. So, and then again, we added that date that it goes into effect because we wanted to make sure that we had people with adequate timing to be able to train and understand this document and get this in place. So when we go into there is an introduction section of P14, and I didn't put a lot of information into this. You can go back and actually read the document. It provides a nice historical background on ISO 17025, 15195, 17034, and the GUM. And really, we pretty much left that alone. That was the historical background. The history didn't change, so we didn't really change anything on that. So the next section, again, pretty much not changed as well. So what we have in here now is what was in there before. We're talking about calibration measurement capability, and we're using the definition that is used by our friends at the National Metrology Institutes, the NMIs, and the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, or the BIPM. So that we have this definition. And the key part of a CMC is that it's a measurement capability that's available to customers under normal conditions. So it says, what is your uncertainty? In a fairly routine measurement process. We're saying, yes, you might get a much better uncertainty if you spent 6 months measuring this device and averaging 1 million measurements, but that's not a routine measurement. This CMCs are to talk about a routine measurement. If you send a meter to a lab, what do you generally get for that meter calibration? And again, as described in the laboratory's scope of accreditation, are granted by a signatory to the ILAC agreement, and it's published in the key comparison database, or KCDB, of the CIPM, which is the International Committee of Weights and Measures Mutual Recognition Arrangement as well. So we're kind of explaining what the definition of the CMC is. And again, we replace that previous term of best measurement capability, or BMC. And again, to continue to stress that this is performed, these are measurements that are performed on a regular basis, and the uncertainty associated with that, and should be available to all customers. And there is an appendix in in P14 with a little more historical background about CMCs and what drove this whole process. I remember, back in, gosh, it must have been the late 90s when the BIPM came to the laboratories, and started to drive this issue. So the only thing that we did, so the next version on the on the 2014 version of this, or 2013 version, excuse me, we had a section called scope, which we basically removed from the 2020 version. And the reason that we removed the scope is because everything that really it said in that scope was really redundant to the preamble and purpose. So we thought that it was a little more efficient just to go ahead and remove the scope from the document because everything said there had been said. So that takes us to the, in breadth, we'll try to get to all the questions at the end of this. So again, we get into the section about the policy on uncertainty, evaluation of uncertainty and measurement in general. And it states that, and again, not a lot has changed out of this. Basically, the accreditation bodies need to make sure that the accredited calibration laboratories evaluate measurement uncertainty in compliance with the ISO guide to the expression of uncertainty of measurement, or the GUM. And again, the accreditation bodies may also use other reference documents on uncertainty, so long as they basically are in harmony with the GUM as well. And that is the actual policy for uncertainty evaluation. If you wanted to frame it up in one sentence, it's follow the ISO guided expression of uncertainty and measurement. So the only thing, and I didn't really put highlights on this because the only thing that really changed out of this document is we did a little bit of sharpening up of language, and we removed a little bit of the redundancies because, again, in the policy, they kind of had a full discussion on the ILAC MRA again, and we thought we already talked about that once. We don't need to talk about it twice. We did remove some references to ISO Guide 35, and the reason we did that is because the title of this document is Policy of Uncertainty for Calibration Laboratories. So we wanted to focus it on calibration laboratories, even if those reference documents or reference laboratories do calibration on occasion as well, as we had previously said. So the ILAC policy on scopes of accreditation. So this whole section talks about what goes on your scope of accreditation. So the scope of accreditation of an accredited laboratory shall include the calibration measurement capability, or CMC, expressed in terms of the measurand or reference material. So what are we trying to measure, like DC volts? The calibration or measurement method or procedure and or type of instrument to be calibrated or measured. So, we're doing direct measurements, or we're using X procedure, or we're calibrating the calibration of DC voltage on voltage measuring instruments. You have to have a range, and you have to have additional parameters where applicable. So, example, if you're doing AC voltage measurement, and you're measuring from 0 to 1,000 volts, you need, and if there's differences in your uncertainty as a function of frequency, then you need to make sure that you also have that well described in your scope. And of course, you need to have the uncertainty of measurement for this particular measurand as well. And again, the real key on this is that there shall be no ambiguity in the expression of the CMC on scopes of accreditation, and consequently on the smallest measurement uncertainty that can be expected to be achieved by a laboratory during the calibration of a measurement. In other words, again, if you cover a range of values, then you might have to express uncertainty a little bit differently that we'll get to in a minute. But the key is that whatever the measurement that you would expect the calibration laboratory to perform, you should have a pretty unambiguous understanding of what their calibration measurement capability is at that point. So, if you could express it lots of different ways. So if you said that I'm going to have a measurement range of 0 to 1,000 volts, well, you can put in a single value. However, that uncertainty has to be valid throughout the entire measurement range. So if that's the case, it would probably be, yes, it's the best measurement, but it's the best of the worst along that range, because if you could measure 2 microvolts per volt at 1 volt, or or 2 parts in 10 to the 6 at 1 volt, but at 100 volts, your uncertainty is 50 parts in 10 to the 6. Your single value can't be 2 parts in 10 to the 6 because that's not valid at 100 volts. So you might need to break down into smaller measurement ranges. In this case, the calibration laboratory shall ensure that linear interpolation is appropriate in order to find the uncertainty at intermediate values. So you might put in a slope intercept type of equation to say, well, from 0 to 1,000 volts, I'm 2 parts or 20 parts in 10 to the 6 plus 5 microvolts. And you could figure out what your uncertainty would be at 1 volts, 10 volts, 50 volts, 100 volts, whatever point using that function. And again, we wanted a linear, it was agreed that a linear interpolation, not trying to get to higher order polynomials within a range was really an appropriate thing to do. You could have your uncertainty expressed as an explicit function of the measure and or a parameter. And you could also have a matrix where the values of uncertainty depend on the values of the measure and additional parameters. So again, for my laboratory, when we're doing precision AC voltage measurement, we might have a matrix where we'll have a voltage level on the columns and a frequency value on the rows, and the matrix will give you an uncertainty for that voltage frequency combination within a table. A matrix where the values of the uncertainty depend on values of the measure and or additional. We already covered that. Sorry. You could do it in a graphical form so long as you have enough resolution on that graph to understand the uncertainty to 2 significant digits that you're providing for the customer on that. I have seen some graphical forms before. For example, network analyzers. Quite often that they will provide a frequency sweep and provide the uncertainty in a graphical form. But again, you need to have sufficient resolution out of that as well. And again, we clarified that open intervals, for example, to say that, okay, that on a range of 0 to 1,000 volts, my uncertainty is better than or less than 2 parts in 10 to the 6. That is an incorrect expression of the CMC. You just can't say, well, I'm better than this, but guess what? I may report smaller. You just can't do that. So that's a pretty important aspect that we had to kind of kill off out of that, because that did nothing but invite ambiguity into the process as well. So just a little side note as well out of this is that I think that in the new P14 document, I think that we were very consistent when we cleaned that up. But some people use the term significant figures, some people use the term significant digits, and these are considered to be the same thing and are used throughout this document using the same terminology and same source documents. So just let know that I've had a lot of look and I have not been able to find any defined difference between a significant figure and a significant digit. If they do, please let me know. I'd love to see that, but I've done a lot of looking. So just understanding those are interchangeable definitions throughout this as well. So, oops. So again, the only thing that really changed out of the policy for scopes of accreditation for calibration laboratories is that, once again, you can see that there's little areas where we just kind of cleaned things up, places that needed an and or instead of just or. We did that, and we added some examples to better explain, and there's a couple of notes that more clearly explain what we meant about the open intervals question, because even some of the reviewers of the document within ILAC when we did a previous draft, were kind of like, oh no, you can't, what are you talking about here? So once we clarified, everything kind of smoothed out for that process as well. And then they understand the intent of what we try to do. So further going on about the policy on scopes for calibration labs. So it states that the uncertainty covered by the CMC shall be an approximate 95% coverage probability. I did a talk at the NCSL conference earlier this year about that. When we use the term approximately 95%, what we're saying is 2 sigma. And I just to clarify that we mean 2 sigma. The reason we don't say that is because of the mathematical definition of 2 sigma is 95.45% level of confidence. However, when you're dealing with measurement uncertainty, you cannot have 4 digits of resolution, because that infers that you know your uncertainty down to 4 significant digits, and that's just never happens. And again, my previous talk on that subject does a really nice historical breakdown about the difference between approximately 95%, which is meant to be infer 2 sigma, versus exactly 95%, which is k equals 1.96. There is a difference between those two. So the uncertainty shall always be presented in the same units of measure of the measurand or in term relative to the measurement. So for example, microvolts for volts or parts in 10 to the 6. And we'll talk about that. Well, the next bullet point, we very specifically stated, because of the ambiguity of the definition, their definitions, the use of ppm and ppb are not acceptable. So we're trying, NIST tech note, when the NIST tech note was at 810 or 814, I'll have to get the actual one on it. It just went out of my head, getting old, I guess. But really covered this. But the point is that in some economies, ppm stands for parts per million, or 1 part in 10 to the 6. In other economies, ppm stands for parts per mille, MILE, which means a part in 1,000. So again, and likewise with ppb. So we are trying to not utilize those in the literature. The CMC quoted shall include the contribution of a best existing device to be calibrated, such that the CMC claimed is demonstrably realizable. So once again, we're closing the door. There were some loopholes about this before, but the point is your CMC should be realistic for the uncertainty for the device that you're going to calibrate, and the best device. So if you're calibrating DC volts and you've got a Keysight 3458, great, use that for that's probably one of the very best instruments. It gives you some of the smallest uncertainties, realizable, or an 8588 from Fluke, same thing. But a device like that, if you have it. But the point is that and the best existing device can't be a fictional device. It needs to be one that's understood as a device to be calibrated, is commercially or otherwise available to customers, even if it has a special performance or has a very long history of calibration. So again, it can't be a fictionalized device to make up your CMC. So on that part of the policy, what's changed? Again, we added the examples of a term like a relative term like microvolts per volt, or part in 10 to the 6. And honestly, those basically mean everything. When we used to use the word part per million, these both are completely substitutable for the term part per million. So if you're concerned about it, it's a very easy change to do that reduces ambiguity as well. And we talked about why we did that, to provide the answer on the prohibition of the term ppm or ppb. And again, SP 811, there it is. Yes. So we prohibited the use of ppm and ppb as per NIST Special Publication 811, which is use of the SI system. And we kind of explained why that already is. And again, why must a CMC include the best existing device? And note, because it's better to alignment to the actual definition of the CMC, and includes the loophole from the previous version. We've still had a lot of laboratories out there that their CMC only was the uncertainty components of their reference standards, and they never included a contributor of the device that they were calibrating. And they were kind of getting away with this. Or even things like, if you're doing a microwave measurement, they were not including microwave mismatch. Well, no, that's a very unrealistic explanation of your actual uncertainty. Mismatch is always a part of your microwave measurement. Now, go find the best matching device you get with the smallest SWR. That's great, but then put that in and what its contribution is going to be, and you're okay. That was the point that we're trying to make out of this process, is that it's a realistic explanation of your uncertainty. But we did address one thing that was a problem with laboratories, with accreditation bodies and laboratories. And I'm sorry, but I'm on the side of laboratories here, folks. But we would have a laboratory that would make a true CMC, and they would do an experiment where they would do the repeatability and resolution of their best existing device, and they'd get a very small standard deviation, and that would cover their CMC. But then maybe they did hundreds of measurements, and on a better day, they got a smaller standard deviation, which turned out to, and if you're automatically computing uncertainty on the fly, maybe it calculated out a smaller uncertainty than was on your scope of accreditation. Now, the laboratory is now violating P14 by reporting an uncertainty that is smaller than which they're accredited to. That happens all the time. So we made the note in there that when it is possible that the best existing device can have a contribution to uncertainty from repeatability equal to 0, then let's go ahead and use this evaluation in the evaluation of the CMC. If it is possible, go ahead and do it. However, other fixed uncertainties associated with the best existing device shall be included. So again, it does give you some leeway of, okay, I may not be getting a 0 standard deviation for my repeatability test today, but it's very possible with this device I could. Then let's just put that in the scope so we don't keep running in and shooting ourselves in the foot with this problem. Then note 3 came up for a very, very corner case from the National Metrology Institutes, and our good friends from the representatives from the BIPM had brought this up to us, is that in very, very exceptional cases, usually involving scopes from the key comparison database, they might not really have a best existing device. And this comes into case like when they're doing when they are doing inter-laboratory comparisons on atomic clocks between nations, that they don't have a stable enough device to go between the two nations to be able to say that they agree down to parts in 10 to the 15 or parts in 10 to the 18 out of that. So if that's the case, then they need to clarify and explain, which contributions may not be included in that particular process as well. So, another area I can think of this is when you're doing measurements on the Josephson voltage system. Generally, the world's best traveling artifact that you can use between Josephson voltage systems is the Fluke 732. But even the Fluke 732 is more noisy and has much more of an uncertainty contribution than the Josephson voltage system. So other than being able to pick up and move one Josephson system to the next place, which they're starting to do now, that's, they need to understand that there are sometimes these issues to address. So again, we kind of covered this already, but the things that changed was the allowance to go to 0 for the purpose of the CMC. And again, because it's been a great source of pain for the calibration labs that had their value as a non-zero repeatability, and then they got a better number later. And again, we already talked about note 3, why that happened to be the case too. And then this was already on there. I'm just going to touch on this briefly for the reference material providers that they have that they talk about when they offer services that do reference value provision. The uncertainty needs to include all factors, and there's some additional notes on that. So if you're a reference material lab, this really none of this changed from before as well. So that was the section on scopes of accreditation. We now have a section, and it's the last section, and it's going to go pretty fast, is the policy for uncertainty on calibration certificates, because most of these are pretty much the same thing. Calibration, now, if you remember right, on the scopes of accreditation, it said when you present your data on scopes of accreditation, you do it at 2 sigma level. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your mind. But on Cal Labs, you will report your uncertainty in compliance with the GUM. Straight, that's pretty easy to do. Include the measured quantity Y and the expanded uncertainty, capital U. And U may be absolute or relative, so it might be in the same units of measurement that you measured. So if you're measuring volts, you could provide it in volts or microvolts, or But if you provided volts, you can do it in parts in 10 to the 6 or microvolts for volts as well. And here's the subtle but important difference is that the coverage factor and the probability must be stated with an explanatory note. And an example of the explanatory note might say, the reported measurement uncertainty is stated such that the standard measurement uncertainty multiplied by the coverage factor K, such that the coverage probability corresponds to approximately 25 or 95%. So in other words, say that, hey, I'm going to provide coverage factors so that I wind up at a 2 sigma level of confidence. And by the way, this happened to my lab after this document was basically done and ready to go to print. But my lab did exactly what this thing said. They still wrote us up because they wanted to actually see all the coverage factor numbers where we feel like we explained exactly what that was. But that's a different situation. So sometimes you might have asymmetrical uncertainty. So you might have +5, -2, in that. So, when you represent your uncertainty, and also you might have other cases where uncertainty might be determined by other methods like Monte Carlo simulations or with logarithmic units. So, which is perfectly in compliance with the GUM, but they're kind of different situations to think about. And again, my note about this is that calibration certificates do not have to have necessarily have to use a 2 sigma level. There are some laboratories that decide on my calibration certificate, I'm going to report at a 3 sigma level of confidence. And because maybe they work for the Department of Energy Nuclear Weapons Complex, and they want to know their uncertainty to a 99.7% level of confidence rather than a 95.45% level of confidence. They're allowed to do that if they want to. And also, labs can also use coverage factors other than 2 if they represent 2 sigma. So again, maybe you're using a combined effective degrees of freedom with a Wells-Satterthwaite equation, and you come up with that your 2 sigma level of confidence, you've actually got 5 degrees of freedom out of that process to get to 2 sigma level of confidence, your coverage factor needs to be 2.65. That's just an example off the top of my head. So it doesn't, so your K value, your coverage factor might be different than 2, but it does represent 2 sigma at the end of the day. So more about that if you on further uncertainty training. Further into this was a kind of a contentious issue that we fixed into this. First of all, the expanded uncertainty shall be reported to at most 2 significant digits. That didn't change. But what did change is we deleted the issue about, well, we said reported measurements may be rounded for presentation. And then we said, but the requirement to the least significant figure of the uncertainty, we got rid of that. I'll explain that in a moment. And again, furthermore, there's a reference to follow rounding rules in Section 7 of the GUM and ISO 80,000, and which I've got at the end of this section. Just about done here, Michael, as well. Just to let you know why I know that we're coming up to question and answer time here. The contributions to the reported uncertainty, that you have the short-term contributions during calibration and contributions reasonably associated in the device under test. Where applicable, you need to cover the same contributions as you did in the CMC, but you don't have to add to the CMC. You can substitute that contributor out of the CMC for what you're actually doing in your actual device as well. So you don't have to double count things as well. The uncertainties that occur outside of the laboratory, like long-term drift or transport, don't need to be a part of your uncertainty. But it's not a bad idea to inform your customers that you could have these. We look at these on our primary standard things like resistors that we look at. Has there been a shift due to travel? And we have to account for that uncertainty if that actually realizes itself, in addition to what the NMI uncertainty was. And again, this is where it's very clearly stated, you are not allowed to report an uncertainty on your calibration certificate that's smaller than what you have on your scope. That's a violation. And of course, the uncertainty shall always be presented in the same units of the measure end or in terms relative to the measure end as well. So the part that really changed was the deletion of the requirement of rounding to the last digit of uncertainty. And the reason why is because some uncertainties are reported to one significant digit. And even if they are reported to two significant digits, it may be less resolution than is necessary to determine if a product is in or out of tolerance with a conformity decision. So maybe you're trying to determine, is my unit in or out of tolerance? And your uncertainty is 190 microvolts, but you've got 1 microvolt resolution on the device under test. If that makes a difference to whether determining if your unit is good or bad, you need that digit. And also, if your device under test displays that digit, then you should also report what the device is displaying, regardless of if you've got a larger uncertainty on that too. So that was an area that caused labs a lot of problems that we corrected as well. So those were two areas that we wanted to fix. So with that, again, we don't have time for the bonus training, rounding and significant digits. I'm just going to flip through a couple of slides so you can see that I've got lots of nice examples of what significant digits are, about understanding where with zeros, leading and lagging zeros, lots of nice examples, rounding rules. So these are with lots of good examples out of that as well. So again, everybody that registers for the webinar will get that as well. So I might leave this presentation up if we need to flip back to a slide, or maybe even to one of the P14 documents itself, Michael. So with that though, would you like to go ahead and try to do our best to process questions?
Yeah, so I know, do you have the Q&A section up on your side? Okay.
If you just want to read them to me, if you can.
Yeah, sure, that's good. So the first question from Joseph is how he can get access to the free document that outlines calculation of measurement uncertainty. Okay,
so if you, the easiest way I'll just say is Google is a great friend there. So if you're doing this for an introductory level, I would Google the Euramet, EURAMET, and then if you put Euramet calibration uncertainty or Euramet EA4/02, there's probably a million sites you can be able to get it, but euramet.org has some great calibration guides on various types of calibration, as well as the general document on uncertainty. If you want to go to the big one, to the master one, to the GUM itself, you could go to the bipm.org website and download the calibration guides is well on that, and you could download the GUM directly from there. I will caution you that if you're a beginner, that's a pretty tough read. I've been studying it for about 30 years, and I still learn new things on it every day.
Awesome. So the next question was, can we technically change the name of BMC to CMC and use the same amount, or should we have to re-estimate that using new calculations?
So again, by now, hopefully in the world, you shouldn't be on BMCs that you've been evaluated by your accreditation body, at least for the last 10 years, on the definition of CMC. So hopefully that's already been taken care of for you. Their definitions are similar, but they weren't exactly the same. So BMC often would not include, the BMC didn't include all the components that you got out of a routine calibration. So again, you really should figure out CMC based upon the actual definition, which is provided both at the BIPM website and within this document. So again, I would guess you're probably already using CMC today, but if not, you could check yourself. When you look at the components of your uncertainty analysis that makes that number, what's in it, and does it align to the definition of CMC?
Awesome, thank you. Next, we had a question about if we're moving away from BMC to CMC, and that CMC you mentioned is the typical calibration, does that mean that we can't be accredited to anything better than our average workload?
No, well, it's the best of your average workload. So again, the example I'm going to use electrical again as an example. Or I can use dimensional. Well, dimensional. So dimensional, you might use gauge blocks of various grades and various uncertainties. For your CMC, I would recommend you build your CMC around your smallest and best uncertainty that you get out of your process, and then you could always use a larger uncertainty for the less routine values. Same thing for DC voltage. If you figure out your uncertainty for the best instruments you calibrate, you could report a larger uncertainty for things that are not as good of a performer in that. So it isn't just your average workload. It really is meant to cover you from best to worst, so to speak, out of that, and it should give you the flexibility to do that. I hope that was that clear enough, you think, Michael?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
So next from Bob, with the changes from BMC to CMC, how should labs that offer measurements of both avenues, meaning those that would fit into BMC like a standard resistor, and those that would fit into CMC like the calibration of an 8508, report the measurement uncertainty when it falls below the CMC? Likely rare, but I could see instances where a lab would have to revert to the SOA reported CMC. For external calibrations, when a lab is not so concerned with TURs further down the line, it's not an issue to default to the CMC. But for labs that calibrate their own standards, the default to CMC could could cause TUR issues.
So yeah, good question. Once again, and I'm kind of surprised that we're still getting this many questions about BMC and CMC, because this was a solved issue in your accreditation if you're an accredited laboratory. And remember that we're talking about ILAC P14, so I'm making the assumption that everybody here is an accredited laboratory, wants to be an accredited laboratory. This has been assessed by your assessors using this for at least 10 years. So I don't think you have to worry about that. You can't use BMC. You've not been allowed to use BMC for at least 10 years. So, but the point is, yes, you could never report an uncertainty less than your CMC. If you calculate, and again, and we do this all the time and at Fluke as well, sometimes we do calculate our uncertainty, and our estimation of uncertainty might be a shade better than our CMC. But if that's the case, then we report our CMC value. Now, what we do is we keep that documentation, we keep that data, and the next time that the assessor comes in, we show them, hey, here's a real life situation, real measurements that we made, and we can use that data to reduce our CMC further so that we don't have that overlap and that we don't have that next time. But again, yes, your process needs to be such that if your computed CMC is smaller than your scope CMC, then you need to report the scope CMC if that is the case. And you're right, it may affect your TURs, but it is what it is. So that your CMC is the best capability that you have been determined to be technically competent to. So, okay, Mike.
Awesome. So a question from Curtis. Hey, Curtis. Do CMCs require type A contributions? ASME B89 has been excluding repeatability in recent standards like the 2018 edition for calipers.
Yeah, ASME B89 is kind of there's a couple people doing things that are a little different on that my personal view contradicts the GUM. It directly contradicts the GUM. P14 in accredited laboratories, B89 may be nice, but if it doesn't, as P14 already said, is that if it doesn't comply with the GUM, it's not a legal document, a legal method to use. So you might win the day with your assessor if you say you're following B89. I'm not saying that you won't, but from a purist standpoint, any uncertainty needs to have an understanding of the variation of the process of short-term contribution. Sometimes resolution dominates that value, so you don't have to. If you can demonstrate that resolution dominates that, then you've already covered it. But if not, Yeah, every uncertainty essentially you need to understand that if I took that measurement, I took a measurement that I don't have zero uncertainty for that measurement. I have some source of uncertainty due to the repeatability, reproducibility. And if I took a second measurement, how much would it change by? So yes, you do have to account for that.
Great. There's a couple of questions about the timing of this going into effect. You mentioned that it goes into effect in March 2021. Nick asked if accrediting bodies are going to be required to audit against all these new requirements at that point, or if there's an adoption period. Corey asked about, they have an audit in August. Is this going to be in effect for them?
So again, I can't speak for all the accreditation bodies and what they do, but we published this document in September of 2020 and made an effective date in March of 2021. So we gave it a 6-month period for effectiveness after date of publication. And that was, made for the accreditation bodies and the laboratories to have the transition time. So I don't know if they're going to, they may add on more transition time, but my expectation would be if I was a laboratory, I would be ready to comply with this 6 months prior, 6 months after publication, which would be this March.
Okay. There were some questions coming in about the recording being available. Yes, it's going to be available on the Fluke Calibration website. Yep. Mark said, you mentioned degrees of freedom with respect to 2 sigma and uncertainty calculations. Can you refer to a guidance document on the relationship and use of degrees of freedom or effective degrees of freedom with 2 sigma and where that gets applied in the best fashion?
Yeah, so EA 402 has some information on that too. And also now this, I will go back to the GUM because it's probably the best area. The GUM in Appendix F, I want to say, covers that information as well to kind of explain that process. Maybe if necessary, we could do a webinar just on that subject. If we get feedback that you'd like to have a little bit more of a understanding of just that component of uncertainty, maybe that's something we can do to break it down and spend a little more time and talk through that as well. So, and Michael, one thing, I know we're getting close to it, but just to let everybody know too, I believe is that, Michael, you'll be able to kind of capture all of the questions and so copy them in where we could answer them after the webinar if we need to as well.
Yeah, I'll have a record of the questions that didn't get answered so that you can follow up with people.
Yeah, so I will do my very best to try to make sure if we didn't get to your question during the live session that I get in and answer a question, and send those out, or maybe even do like an FAQ maybe because 5 people might have kind of the same question, out of that as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Your decision, Michael, on how many more you want to hit.
Let's hit one more. Let me see here. So you stated that the contribution from repeatability can be 0, but according to the GUM section F.2.2.1, even if it's 0, they would need to use that as a contribution. Do you have any comments there? Yeah.
Yeah, yes. If it's 0, you add 0 as the contribution. So not out of line with what the GUM's saying. And again, we're saying for the purpose of CMC, where you could have some variation on it. For the purpose of your scope, CMC, to kind of get out of that issue that one of the previous questioners had on that as well. But yes, you would still put that, we expect to see that in your uncertainty analysis plugged in as a 0 in explaining why you for the purpose of your scope, but never, ever, ever for the actual measurement.
Oh, sorry, to clarify, he said that they're putting it as 0.29 times the resolution.
Oh, well, that's a different issue. Again, yes, you always do need, if you are also constrained by limited resolution of the measuring device, yes, resolution is also, there's a difference between resolution and repeatability, and I'm only talking about repeatability. I'm not talking about going to 0 resolution. Those are 2 separate issues, and nicely pointed out as well by the person in the question.
Yeah. There was a couple questions about CMCs, one to kind of define what CMC really means. but also why it's applied only for routine testing.
So again, what we're trying to say is, well, number one, the definition of the CMC is in P14, so you can maybe go back and take a look at it and just take some time, some quiet time to kind of take that all in. But what we're saying about routine testing is I'm saying what we're trying to explain is that it's the uncertainty that's available under normal conditions. If I sent you my gauge blocks today, this was the uncertainty I would expect to get back, not the uncertainty that you could give me if you spent a year measuring them. I'm saying the normal service, when your company does normal gauge block calibration service, what is the uncertainty I would expect to get back? That's what it means under routine conditions.
Perfect. And then there were a couple of questions about Metcal and how it handles this, and I'll actually address those myself. For those not aware, I'm the product owner of Metcal, so that's kind of what I do. The specific question I'm looking at is about how it's handling the change, and that the previous guidance from Fluke was to set the resolution to a high number, and then you could use that for your CMC. So the guidance we've given, and we have this as an article on our knowledge base for the support side, is basically covered by what Jeff talked about in note 3 on that portion with using a zero repeatability. And what that allows is that Metcal will never report an uncertainty that's lower than your CMC when you're taking that approach, because you're always going to have a repeatability that gets included in the calculation that Metcal is doing. Now, that relies on making sure that everything else that goes into your CMC is included, which may mean including specific, contributors that aren't automatically done by a given FSC, and making sure that you're including those additional contributors to cover it all in that same calculation. But as long as you're including all those contributors, and if you're using that CMC approach of having a zero repeatability, you're never going to report a lower uncertainty with Metcal.
And Michael, I think that'd be another great webinar to do. I think it's time to redo that one again, of just if people want to walk through the mechanics of, okay, I'm using Fluke Metcal as a software platform. How do I produce uncertainty that A, has the 2 digits, significant digits of resolution that meets the P14 requirements, and B, never underreports my uncertainty? That might be a nice one to go back. And I know you've got a great webinar, great online articles for that, but consider that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll have our webinars that we do for the Measurement Science Conference timeframe coming up in a couple months. That'd be a good opportunity to do it then as part of our user group meeting.
Great idea.
All right. Thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully you got something out of this. And as mentioned, we'll be sending out the information about where to access this on the website. And thank you, Jeff. And we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Thanks all for your attendance. I appreciate it. Have a great day. Okay, and